All right, guys, we're back on the Next Level Agents podcast, and I'm excited for today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Nikki Miller. Nikki, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here and talk. You and I were just talking before we hit record about how we've been in the same room so many times, and kind of like I definitely know you, you definitely know me, and yet we've not really connected a whole lot. I can think of one time with our little friend Nick Walden there that we maybe got to spend some time together in Vegas at an event once for like a few minutes. But outside of that, this probably be our most in-depth talk. So I'm excited for this.
I'm super excited too. It's always a little awkward when you've been in those rooms with people and you really know them fairly well. As you get into some of those rooms, the friend groups get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm glad you felt the same way because I was worried I was going to get on and be weird. I told you at the beginning, I was like, I know you, but do you know me?
For sure. I know that feeling. I'm usually the one that has that feeling of like, because I try to pay attention to what people are doing, and especially when it's something different, which is why I'm excited to have this conversation. Because I remember sitting at you and I were also talking about our mutual friend Stevie D a little while
Yeah.
ago, and I was sitting at one of his events a few years ago, and you were talking, and the thing that stood out to me the most was like you had this very significantly different business model than than anyone I had heard from. And it's kind of rare. Like you see different models and the way people run their business. And that's one thing I love about the podcast is I like to feature people that aren't like normally on stage or get to share their story because they don't sort of fit the mold of everybody else that's on stage. And so when I hear something like that, like you, I'm always intrigued. So why don't we start? I know you recently had a really cool thing happen with the LEAD Syndicate and OJO, and we're going to get there. But why don't we start with tell me what the LEAD Syndicate is and how did that even come to be?
It's my favorite story of how I think so, especially in the world of real estate, as the business has evolved, I think that the sort of runway for how to be successful has gotten shorter and smaller. And what I mean by that is it's like if you don't have a huge team or you don't have a huge downline or you weren't first to this in this location or whatever it is, you're just not successful in our world. And that it's the whole industry has been sort of predicated around these really narrow, in my opinion, business models and belief systems. And I was an individual agent growing in my business. And I remember looking at these people like you, like some of our friends who were up on these stages building these huge businesses. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want that. Right. And I would look up and I knew I had fairly significant business prowess early. Like I was able to cut through what I call like the lies up on stage. They're like, oh yeah, I have this huge business and everything's great. And I'm home by 5 every night. And I was like, liar, no, you're not. And I would look at them and I would say, I just don't want that. And so where the LEAD Syndicate came from was I was an individual agent. And I remember I kind of hit my like ceiling of achievement as every individual agent does, right? And I hit my ceiling of achievement. I wasn't able to do any more transactions. So I went into my manager at the time and I just said that. I said, hey, I've hit my ceiling. Like, what do I do now? And she said, okay, well, now we're going to get you a coach and we're going to teach you how to hire people. And we're going to teach you how to manage overhead. And we're going to teach you how to fire people. We're going to teach you how to build systems. And we're going to teach, and my eyes, like if she had read my body language, she would have just seen me pulling away from the conversation. And by the way, I'm also 23 years old at the time. Like I should not have been responsible for anyone except myself. And I was barely responsible for myself. And so I looked at my manager and said, like, no, I don't want to do any of that. That all sounds really bad. I'm good at one thing, and that is being a real estate agent. I'm great at building relationships. I'm dogged in my lead generation. I don't want to touch anything else. I do not want to touch anything else. And she said, well, this is the way it's always been done. The famous words in real estate. And so I tried it that way and hated it. Like I just hated it, Kevin. And I remember looking up at those stages and thinking, maybe something's wrong with me. Like maybe I'm in the wrong business or maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And so I kind of failed for a while in definitions of building out in real estate. I really wasn't successful in building a team and I hated it. And I went into my manager again and said, like, hey, thanks so much for the classes and the coach and all this stuff. But I don't want to do any of this. Somebody before me has figured this out and I would like to just pay them to do it. How do I do that? And she said, well, that doesn't exist. The only option you would have would be to join a team. And what I also knew is that I wasn't somebody who wanted to put my brand under someone else. I had a clear vision of what I wanted the business to look like. I just didn't want to operate it, right? And so she said, you'd have to join a team. You'd have to put your brand under them, your production under them. And I said, nope, definitely don't want to do that. And she said, well, if you don't want to do that and you don't want to build it out yourself, you only have one other option. And I said, well, what's that? She said, then I guess you just stay where you are. And what she didn't have to say is that I would suffer the consequences of staying where I was, which means that it's just the agent who makes the same amount of money year over year, sells the same amount of houses every year. And by the way, for some people, that's fine. But I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And so I finally looked up and said, well, what does everybody else do? Like, what are all these individual agents doing if they don't want to build it themselves and they don't want to join a team? And this just kept like sort of circling in the back of my head. So I failed forward for a while. I ended up sort of by force building it out myself. I built a successful team through California, became the CEO of what at the time was the largest brokerage in California, and realized there that this wasn't a unique problem to me. Every individual agent ever was going through the same challenges, and they would come into my office and we would have the same stupid conversation that I had had with my manager before them. And they all were asking for just a different way. And so eventually I looked up and said, somebody's got to build it. Like I think I'm going to go build it. And so I said, well, what would it look like if I built something specifically for individuals? Teams are taken care of, new agents are taken care of. What about all those individual agents that live in the sort of messy middle of those two? And I said, what if I built something specifically for them that gave them all the economies of scale, all the support, all the benefits, all the infrastructure of having a team around them, except I would protect them from having to have a bunch of overhead and manage it themselves. And I would keep them from having to join a team. And everybody was like, you're crazy. Nobody builds things for individual agents. And you said at the beginning of this, made me giggle a little bit because you're right in that, like, at the beginning, I wasn't on a bunch of stages. I wasn't very well known because everybody was like, we don't know what to do with you. Like, what is this thing? We don't know what to do with you. You don't fit any of our real estate boxes. It's not a team, but it's also not like admin support only, because we supported them in growing their business and a leverage platform. And frankly, all these really great friends that we had, the ones that we were chatting about before we hit record, all these great friends that we had looked at me, people I really respect in the business, and were like, don't do this, Nikki. Like, you're crazy. Please don't do this. It's going to fail. It's not going to work. Nobody builds things for individual agents. Please don't do this. And I was like, well, what's the worst that happens, right? Worst thing that happens is I'll come back to you all and say you were right. Didn't work. Well, I launched the LEAD Syndicate in January of 2021. And turns out it worked. And there was a lot of individual agents just like me out there who just wanted a different way to be able to grow. And were looking for a solution that we had all been looking for. And frankly, that I was looking for when I was a growing agent too. So I launched it, it took off. And then that sort of brings us to today.
So let's do this. First of all, I love that, because this is exactly what I'm looking for. Why I love talking to different people is because there are so many ways, like the advice that you got from your manager, probably very well intentioned. And unfortunately, this is the shortcoming in the brokerage model, is you normally have a manager who does have that very narrow scope of like, hey, I'm taught how to coach on one thing and how to help people build this one way. But we're in an industry that there's not just one way to do things. And unless you're an operator and have been there yourself, like, you don't realize some of the different ways that things can be done. And, sure, certainly this could have gone wrong. This could have not, quote unquote, not worked. But also, obviously it had a chance at working. Otherwise we wouldn't be here having the conversation we're having today. So this is something I love, because there's so many agents are told not to do this, don't do that, or they're doing something, but only because they heard someone else on stage. Like you said, like, I quit having my agents on my team go to big national events with me because the last thing I wanted them to hear was somebody on stage. Because to your point, most people can't delineate the bullshit from the little golden nugget that, a lot of times people are giving golden nuggets. The problem is they're surrounded by a bunch of bullshit and the stage talk stories. And so they think they have to do things a certain way. So I love the fact that you were like, hey, I'm going to go carve my own path. I'm going to do this differently, even though people I respect and probably people that care about me are telling me not to. I'm still going to go find this out, because there's not one way to do this.
100%. And I think that, like I said, I think this happens in the world in general. I always say when you're coming up with something new, you're probably on the right track if people don't think it's going to work. Most people cannot believe that which they have not seen before, right? And I always say that both fear and faith require us to believe in something that we've never seen or can't see. And so you get to decide which one you're going to lean into at any given time. And I think that one of the things that I had to make a decision on really early is that I felt this in my gut, and I felt that this is something that I would have used. Right. And I always have believed that, like, we're never solving problems in a vacuum. If we have the problem, somebody else has the problem. And I was just really confident that if I had had the same problem, that if I had believed this in my own business, as someone who does not shy away from hard work and does not shy away from learning and achieving, there was probably other agents out there that were a lot like me. And it turns out I was right.
So let's do this. Let's dive into, like, what exactly was the LEAD Syndicate? Like, as you started to build this out and realize you had something, tell me, like, what is it? You mentioned it's, ideally for the individual agent, but what are they? Why did it speak to them so much, so well?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the first part of it was, I said from the beginning, how can we give agents the best of both worlds? Because so many agents didn't want to build it themselves because they didn't want to take on the overhead. As you know, that's huge in our business. Like, that's probably the first barrier to entry for most individuals. I just don't want to be responsible for the salary, whether I'm selling homes or not. Right. That's a huge step for a lot of people to take. So they didn't want to go that route, and they didn't know what to do or how to manage it. Right. They are great at selling, great at real estate, but not great at building systems or scaling. And so they didn't want to go the route of them building it out themselves. But alternatively, the only other option, if they didn't want to do that, would have been to join a team. And most of them got into the business because they wanted to build something for themselves, right? They didn't want to give up their brand or production under somebody else. And so I said, well, if I can put both of those together, give people a platform where they get to retain their brand, they get to continue to remain an individual agent, take credit for it, build their business, but don't have to bring on the overhead. We'll build a partnership where we're pay by success. Would that be a value? And then the second thing I looked at was, what does every agent need? And I tell most people, like, what we offer and how we run their business isn't revolutionary. It's everything that every agent needs, but doesn't usually have the ability to put together consistently themselves. And I realize every single agent needs 5 areas of their business that are consistently running in order for them to actually build compound interest: coaching and training, database management, marketing, transaction management, and supplemental lead generation. That's it. Like, that's all they need. And so that's what we cover. Those are the 5 areas. And so I think agents looked at our platform and said, okay, well, I in this world of getting support, I can either have this comprehensive leverage platform that I just literally plug into, or I can have a set of tools that I have to go and use. And I think that that's the differentiator, because I tell people all the time, the sort of buckets of how we support the agent, the different levers of how we support the agent are available to people. You can either go hire a VA or hire a company and get some database support and some marketing support and some leads and whatever that looks like. But then it's still up to the agent to put all the pieces together, to make all the wheels turn, to tell if they get a transaction, they have to tell the marketing team and the database team and the transaction management team, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas it's not a set of tools for them to use. We do it for them. I know what the agents need. And so we built a comprehensive model that they literally just get to plug into. And from day one, it just starts working. They don't have to tell it what to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. And give me an idea. So you said you launched in 2021. You and I are recording this, May of 2024. Sounds like it's grown fairly quickly. Give me an idea, like, when did you know, like, oh, for sure this is taking off?
Yeah. What's funny is that I'm a testament to, if you build well and if you show up correctly day to day, that success comes. I wish I could lie to everybody and say that I had this big vision for the LEAD Syndicate or now Lever. Like, I didn't. And I wish I could tell you from the beginning, I was like, yeah, this is going to be hugely successful. I didn't know that either. But I had a hunch. And what I found out, ironically, as someone who really resisted building out systems, I found out what I'm exceptional at, what my special skill is systems that scale. And I didn't know that before. And so I built it for one location. That's all I thought I was going to do. I was like, I think this is a great idea. I think it'll really help this one location. So I built it in my home location for one brokerage, and it worked really well. And then another brokerage approached me and said, hey, we think we have some agents that would really benefit by using this. Would you be willing to share it with them in our brokerage? And I was like so nervous about it. I was like, oh my God, 2 locations. Holy moly. And so I did it in that other location, and that worked really well. And I thought, maybe systems at scale have nothing to do with location. Maybe I'm just really good at systems that scale. And if I can rethink what has to be localized, or if I can leverage out what has to be localized, maybe I really have something here. So I started going to other brokerages and sharing the model and saying, hey, is this something that would benefit your agents? And of course, every single one of them was like, yeah, that's our biggest problem. That's every brokerage's biggest pain point, is that group of individuals who don't want to join a team, don't want to build a team, and aren't brand new agents. Right. And that's the majority of the people who make up their brokerage. And by the way, are their biggest revolving door, their biggest time suck, their biggest frustration. And all these brokers and managers are trying to build their businesses while they're also trying to control and build their own. And it just doesn't work. And so I would go to them and say, hey, I have this solution for literally your biggest pain point. And every single one of them opened their doors wide and said, yes, please come in and take these people. And so I started just going to brokerages and sharing what we did. And in our first year, I didn't really start scaling. I launched it in literally January of 2021. And I didn't even go to my second location until July of 2021. And I remember part of this, Kevin, was from, you've heard the same things I've heard on all these stages. Part of this came from the limiting beliefs that everybody else around me had, which was, hey, you can't scale until you've mastered one location. You can't scale until you found a leader in that location. And then I finally thought to myself, well, how will I ever know if it scales if I don't just go try to scale it? Like, you can't know if you have a hole in your bucket until you fill the thing up with water. And so I thought, I'm just going to try it. Like, literally the worst thing that happens is it fails. And so I went to that second location and it worked really well. And I went to the third location and it worked really well. And I just kept going. And if it failed, I didn't like make a thing about it. If it failed, literally the worst case scenario was the agent was like, I hate you, this doesn't work. I was like, cool, leave. Right? No harm, no foul. And so I just kept growing from there. So my first year, I only ended the year, I think, in 6 or 7 different locations. But by my second year, I had grown to about 70 locations. And by our third year, we ended 2024, or we ended 2023 in December in over 160 different locations.
160. Wow. That's some serious scale there.
Yeah.
And so you recently had, what's the proper word? Is it a partnership, an acquisition, with OJO and
Acquisition.
Acquisition. And now you mentioned the word, the launch of Lever, kind of, I guess the rebrand might be the proper way of saying that.
Yeah.
What's the vision for it now going forward?
Well, where the acquisition came from, it was not my dream or goal to sell the LEAD Syndicate. I was like, I'll run this thing forever. I love my job. And I'm still running it, right? That was part of the deal in the acquisition. I was like, you're not taking it away from me. I love what I do. And so what the sort of unintended consequence, what I expected to happen, is that if you put all of these resources together well for the agent, that their businesses would grow. If you could put them back in front of more, having more client conversations, doing more and better lead generation, while all these things were still happening for them in the background, I had a hunch that their businesses would grow. Well, that hunch was right. We can prove that the agents that are with us and stay with us long term are growing their businesses double, triple, quadruple digit percentages year over year, right? It was no small amount. That's what I figured would happen. The unintended consequence, the thing I didn't think would happen, the thing I sort of fell into, was the way that I was able to generate leads at scale. That's like the number one thing everybody asks me about scale, is like, how do you get leads in that location? I'm like, well, I don't know how to get leads in Alabama. So I didn't try. And I also didn't want to try to fight these big aggregators who have billions of dollars to spend on acquiring leads. Right? So I would go to lead aggregators and I would say, hey, this is my business model. This is what I do. Here's the proof of how we help agents grow and serve their clients. Can you give us leads? And we'll pay by success. right? And I got all of them to say yes. And it started a realization that through our model and through our support, what we also were doing really well was converting leads at a really high level, because the agent had all the support around them so they could just focus on this. And where most agents fail in online lead acquisition is not in the 30-day conversion. It's in the long-term lead follow-up that nobody does. But we do that for the agent. So in our world, they were converting at a much higher level than everybody else was. So all these aggregators were coming to me and saying, like, how come your agents convert better than teams, convert better than all these individual agents? Like, what's going on here? And I would just show them, here's what we do. And I've known Chris. Chris is one of the first people I met in the world of real estate. I met him when I was 22 years old, and I got invited to like a young professionals mastermind or something like that. I'm actually pretty sure I snuck in. Like, I had no reason to be in that room. And so we've known each other for a little while. And he was the one who said, I think you might like actually have something here. And I was still early enough in the business. I was like, yeah, maybe we'll see. And this was a couple of years ago when I was still very early on in building it. And he was one of the aggregators that I went to and said, hey, this is what I do. This is how I do it. If it fits your business model, can you work with my agents? And again, sure enough, we were extremely successful in conversion. And what we were also extremely successful at was a consistent client experience for the agents, which, as you and I both know, is what's missing in the industry wide. And so that started a later conversation with Chris and John, the CEO of OJO, and I, of a bigger conversation. Like, they asked me the same question you're asking, which is, what's the future of this? And I said, I actually think that what I've built is not just for the agent. I think it's for the consumer, because through this consistent support that we give the agent, we also provide a much more consistent consumer experience. And if I can get in front of more consumers with my agents that have this support, well, I think I might just be able to like change some perspective around the real estate industry. And make no mistake, Kevin, like every person I shared that dream with was like, good luck, kid. Like, that pat me on the head and we're like, good, that's cute, good luck. But Chris and John were like, we think you're right. We think you could actually do that. And so that started this conversation and really culminated in us saying, well, the only way for us to both do this, because that was their goal too, is to put our resources together, to take this operating system with this connection to the consumer and open it up to the real estate industry as a whole.
That's awesome. I can't think of two better guys for you to partner with on something. I like them both a lot. Chris and I are a lot closer, though John and I are friends, and I respect the hell out of him too. But I think those two guys and their business and their vision and what you've built are such a great match that I'm so happy to see it, because I think together you guys are gonna be able to take this super far.
Thank you. It's super exciting. And I think it's to me a testament that to bring it back to what we first started talking about, a testament that there's just so many ways to succeed in this industry and so many ways to succeed in this business. And I just want to open agents' eyes to what that can look like. And that ultimately we should all define success by what the consumer's experience is with our industry, right? It doesn't matter how many agents you have on your team, doesn't matter how many units you sell, doesn't matter what your brokerage is. Like, what really matters, what I think we're seeing in the industry right now, especially, what really matters is the consumer's experience, and whether or not they had such a good experience with you that they would willingly do it again, right? And again and again and again. And whether you're willing to be in front of them consistently enough to have a lifelong client. And I think that's what's been missing in the world of real estate, a really consistent operating experience for both the consumer and the agent.
This won't surprise you even a little bit, but probably 6 years ago, maybe 6.5 years ago, I was in a mastermind, and Chris was in the room, and he effectively said, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here and trying to remember back 6.5 years ago, but he basically said, the differentiator here now, like, this isn't about lead gen, like, this is about client experience.
Yeah.
And whoever can provide the best client experience to be able to, like, forget about worrying about technology and, big tech and big data and all these different things that everyone was so worried about for so long. Like, whoever can provide the client experience at the highest level that the clients are actually looking for, that's who's going to win. And so
100%. And I don't think that's changed, by the way.
no, not at all. Not at all. No, this is you're 100% on. I think at the end of the day, no matter what changes come, whether through tech or innovation, At the end of the day, it's how does that client, how does that consumer feel? What do they experience when they go through a transaction? Like that's going to be who wins always.
100%. It always brings me back to one of my favorite sort of examples or stories of innovation is Jeff Bezos, and not for the reason that most people would attribute to him being an innovator. Because to me, Amazon like isn't innovative at all. In fact, my favorite part about Amazon is like if you watch really early interviews with Jeff Bezos, he talks about the way he came up with Amazon was because he knew he wanted to build an online platform that serviced this way. And the only way he would be able to do it at the speed at which he wanted to do it was to sell something that people bought a lot of. So he literally looked for what do people buy more of on a unit basis than anything else? And the answer was books. Like that's the reason that Amazon started selling books, not because it was so innovative, because he needed something to sell. And so he went out, and then the second question he asked himself, or rather the second question was, what am I going to sell? First question is, what's never going to change? What's never going to change with the consumer? What is never going to change is they're always going to want their stuff at the best price. They're going to want it as fast as possible. They're going to want the best selection. They're going to want it with convenience. And by the way, he's just innovated on that business model over and over and over and over again, which to me is like not that innovative, right? And I look at my business and I always say, how can I bring it back to that level of simplicity? What are agents always going to want? And what are the consumers always going to want? And how can I just deliver on that better than anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. And I've heard him quoted in that many a times. And people do, you know, in our industry and others, like they tend to think about what's going to change and what's the future going to look like. And they always, it's so easy to overlook and forget like what's not going to change? What is the
Yeah.
consumer going to always want to be a certain way? And if you focus on delivering that in a different environment, you're always going to win.
Yeah, what will always remain the same? What if I execute on this at the highest level will continue to bring me business? It's why I always sort of laugh at like, I know that this happens to you too. And every time I'm at someone who speaks at a lot of conferences, I always have a good laugh because I'll either have it, I'll experience it or I'll witness it with them, that somebody stops you in the hallway, right? And says to you some version of like, all right, Kevin, nobody else is around. It's just you and me. I promise I won't tell anybody, but will you just like tell me the secret of real estate? I won't tell, like, it'll just be between you and me. Just tell me the secret you're not telling anybody else. And every time it happens to me, I'll be like, all right, but you promise not to tell? And they're like, yeah, I promise. I'm like, all right, you ready? And they're like, yeah, I'm ready. Have you considered like just doing the work? Because that's honestly it. Like that's the secret. If you want to sell more real estate, you got to talk to more people about buying and selling real estate. That's it. You want to provide a better client experience, you got to provide a system, create a system and have a platform in order to provide a consistent client experience over and over and over again. Doing it one time is not enough. Like that's it. That's the business model. Easy as that.
Shocking. It's shocking how true that is and how, yeah, work works 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can overcomplicate it, by the way. Like as agents, we do with the best of them. Like I've never seen people overcomplicate things like real estate agents do, which is usually just an avoidance of like the real work, which
Yeah.
is you got to talk to people about buying and selling real estate.
Agents, we are so good at effectively creating problems so we can solve them.
Oh, yeah.
We're so good at that as a whole. So
Yeah, I've come to find in business that I always call them firefighters. Like the people who are constantly firefighting are usually also the arsonists. They
yeah,
are almost always creating the problem just so they can solve it. Which to me, like if that's how you want to spend your day, is cool. But there are better things you could be doing with your time.
that's one of my Dan Sullivan's got some quote that it's very similar. Is like most entrepreneurs like are so proud of the fact that they, you know, they're firefighters, but in reality they're arsonists. Like that
Yeah,
that is so true. Um, I love that. So Nikki, before as we're winding up here, tell obviously this solo agent, like is there any other qualifier other than what we've talked about as far as like who's the ideal candidate
yeah.
to plug into what you guys are doing and to really extract the most value out of it for their business?
Yeah, we've got three like pretty consistent avatars. The first is somebody who's left a team and wants to go about it on their own. We get a ton of those. People who used to be on a team were very productive on a team and really want to build their own individual brand. Like most of the time, what we do was not available to them yet. Like it didn't exist yet. And so they'll come to us and they'll say, I want to build my own individual business or my own individual brand, but I'm now used to having all this support around me, right? So I want to have an easier transition by having all of that support around me continuously while I build it for myself. So we get a lot of those. We also get a lot of individual agents who've just hit their ceiling of achievement. And I always say this comes in a couple different forms. It's either in the number of units they can sell and the amount of money they're making and the amount of time that they have, or they're just completely falling out of love with real estate. Like I get people that are either going to work with us or they're going to quit. Like they just cannot do all the jobs anymore. And so they don't come to us necessarily because they want to grow. They come to us because they want relief, right? In whichever one of those it is. Like I just need somebody to take these things off of my plate or I am going to die. And so we get a lot of those. And then of course, our other biggest one is we get a lot of people who want to grow. Like they're hitting their ceiling at all those ceilings I just mentioned, any or all of them. And they know that in order to get to the next level, in order to break through that ceiling, they can't keep going about their business the exact same way. They're going to need support around them, but they don't want to join a team and they don't want to build it themselves. So we get a ton of those who just want a different way to be able to break through that ceiling and want to plug in and go fast.
That's awesome. And so for the people that are listening right now, that are identifying, they're like, hey, she just described me. How do they find out more about what you guys are doing?
You can always find me on Instagram, easy to find, and I always respond. It's actually me that runs that thing. So it's at the Nikki Miller, or you can check us out at leverbymavoto.com.
And we'll put both of those in the show notes. That way you can easily link to that from wherever you're listening or watching this at. And awesome. Any last words, anything that we didn't cover that we should have today?
Ooh, well, last words, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor. I'm so excited that we actually finally got to do this and connect with each other. And I would say last words are for anyone out there who's listening to this and thinking like, maybe there's something wrong with me because I'm not growing the way everybody else is, or I'm not behaving the way everybody else is, or I don't have the same strength that everybody else does. In my experience, that thing that you're resisting is actually your strength. So lean into it, pay attention to it. It's there for you, and figure out how to use that in order to go and achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve, whatever success looks like for you.
That's super solid advice and probably a great way to wrap up. So Nikki, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule today to join us.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
My pleasure. All right, guys, we'll see you next week on the Next Level Agents podcast.